the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me, first-timer, Knoxville News Sentinel, Adam Sparks is here. R2-D2's behind him, got some stormtroopers behind him. The Star Wars aficionado is here. Adam, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Per usual, the Tennessee football offseason is not off. It's very much on. There's never an off season when you've got the portal and NIL and rev share and all that sort of stuff. And so things are humming, even though it's late January. It's fun.
But it's good, right? Like, it's good for sports writing. It's good for Tennessee writers and podcasters like us, where it's like, hey, the content doesn't stop, especially in football. Yeah,
college football is now turning toward the NFL in more ways than one, some good, some bad, but in a good way. It's a 12-month-a-year sport. I mean, that's why I have a job. We in our network, it's USA Today Network. We have a beat writer at every SEC school, but I think I'm the only one, maybe the only two, that Tennessee's the only one in our network, I think, that has beat writers for each sport. So I'm football year round. We also have a basketball, baseball. We also have a Lady Vols. Because there's so much content in Tennessee football, we have to have somebody year round to cover it. And the other teams, Georgia, Alabama, we don't necessarily have that. So it speaks of the fanaticism of Tennessee fans, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to first ask you about, so you did a 2025 depth chart projection in the Knoxville News Sentinel that folks can go check out in the paper and digital e-newspaper. I love that. I'm a big e-newspaper guy. It's very, very efficient. I did it with the AJC and Knox News every day. And I wanted to kind of pick your brain on this. So when you were going through it, what stood out to you? What is it? Does it look like a better roster potentially than what we saw last year that went 10-2? What do you make of the 2025 depth chart at this point?
No, it's not a better team. It's not a better roster. I mean, this is somewhere between this could either be rebuilding or reloading. And this may seem like similar terms, but rebuilding is, so Josh Heupel, I think, has a pretty high floor. At this point in his tenure, I think his floor is 8-4 record. So rebuilding is 8-4. And the roster they have now, I think, is probably around 8-4. The roster they could have would be the ceiling, which would be around 10-2. But they've got some work to get there. They've got to add some guys from the portal. They have to develop some guys that I have questions about. But if you just look at a few positions, wide receiver is not good enough right now. Could be later, but I think there's way too many questions at wide receiver that has to be improved in the portal and elsewhere. Offensive line could be fixed in the portal pretty quickly. I have a little more hope on that one because I do think Josh Heupel's offensive lines, in that scheme, they tend to play pretty well regardless of who you plug in there. They're just going to be plugging a lot of different new faces there. I have a little more hope for the offensive line. A defensive line, I'm good with. I get a lot of questions from fans of how are they going to rebuild the defensive line? They lost 3 tackles that'll all be in the NFL next year. They lost James Pierce, who'd probably be a first-round pick. They lost Jason Jenkins to the portal. I'm kind of fine with the defensive line. I mean, they played usually 12 guys, and I think 7 of them are coming back. Like any other team, if they said you're getting 7 guys back on the defensive line that played, all those guys played more than 100 snaps, most of them more than 250 snaps. Like most teams would look at that and say, oh, okay, so all the starters are back. Like, no. But 7 of the top 12, it just happened to be that Tennessee had probably the deepest defensive line in college football last year. And so that's a luxury. And I just sort of trust Rodney Garner to bring 2 or 3 guys along. I think there's a logjam of talent at defensive line. And so I'm not worried about that at all. Jermod McCoy's ACL injury bothers me, worries me, because I think that becomes now a portal need at corner. So you've got to answer a lot of those questions. Offensive line's got to be shorn up. Wide receiver, you've got to find some type of difference maker, and you got to make it work at corner until Jermod gets back. If you answer those questions in the affirmative, then this could be a 10-2 team. But right now, I'm more in the 8-9 win range.
Do you think that's where they're at internally? Do they see this more as a rebuild, or do you think that they see it more as a retool?
I would hope they see some of the problems more as schematic. Josh Heupel, he hands over the defense to Tim Banks and Rodney Garner and all his assistants and say, hey, you guys were really good this year. See if you can be really good next year with a different lineup. But his whole focus is on offense. He's an offensive guy. And I would say if Tennessee's offense gets back to where it was, closer to where it was 2 years ago, it's going to be as much of changes on scheme as it is personnel. Like, they just didn't have guys open in the passing game against good teams this year. Some of that is guys weren't getting separation. There's no Cedric Tillman on this bunch that you can throw up the ball and he'll beat a guy for a high ball. There's not a Jalen Hyatt on this roster yet. Now, Mike Matthews could develop into that or somebody else. It took Jalen a couple years till he hit that. But the difference with those guys a couple years ago is they were schemed open. Like Josh Heupel and Golish and even some Halsley, they schemed them open. And Hendon Hooker hit them when they were open. And those pieces all fit together in a good way. And some of the wideouts struggled this year. Nico struggled at times this year. The protection struggled this year. Like, everything took a half step back, but the scheme took bigger step back than that, I think. I think that's where the most improvement's got to be. Josh Heupel needs to be recruiting and getting guys out of the portal, but they've got to sit in the film room and figure out how it is they can counter what's going on, because their opponents have now countered that offense. They put a lot of safeties over top. They keep everything in front of them. And, they just have not. I mean, the counter to that is you throw short underneath. You run the ball well, which they did with Dylan Sampson, and you throw underneath, and you have guys that can be dynamic in the open field. And they didn't have those guys. I mean, I love Squirrel White, but if you throw him a 7-yard pass, he's going to get 9 yards. He's not going to break it for 40. And of course, Squirrel's gone now, but they have to either develop those guys or find those guys, but they have to scheme them open in different ways.
That's fair. I look at it in terms of like the defense. I think we're on the same page when it comes to defense. I mean, this was a borderline top 10 defense this year. I think people probably overthought the Ohio State blowout. You saw what Oregon dealt with right after, and they're now the national champs. And the Georgia stuff was surprising, I think, with just the fact they weren't able to get home once on 40 dropbacks for Carson Beck. I thought that was weird. But to your point, I think they're going to be fine. Like Jordan Ross, Caleb Herring, and company are going to step right in for James Pierce. Joshua Joseph is going to have a really good year. Like, they're going to be just fine on the defensive line. I think Marion Dye is going to be a good player. Isaiah Campbell was a big late ad. Like, the strong side defensive inside, like losing Jason Jenkins, but like Garner develops there. Like, the whole defensive side of the ball, there is a proof of concept where they've gotten better in scoring defense every year. You retain Tim Banks, which I think is a win, because I think he's somewhere in that top 10 to 15 in the nation defensive coordinator. I'm not saying he's the best, but I do think he is somewhere in the top 15, and he gets better every year. The Jerron McCoy injury, you talk about hurts, but like, let's see where Caleb Beasley is in the spring. Like, he's a blue chipper that you kept around. I wonder, Jordan Matthews, if he had known like what was happening here, like, is he back? Because he was kind of that next man up after Jalen McMurray. So I don't know what that would have been like, but it's complicated. The portal's complicated. But I think they're going to be better at star. Boo Carter, another year in the system, he's going to be a lot more comfortable. I think they're going to be better with Idris Farouk potentially at that Will Brooks spot, because that's where they got picked on, was in those big games against Arkansas, against Georgia, and against Ohio State. It was the middle of the field, and it was safety. Like, Will Brooks was solid in spots, but if you weren't getting home, the middle of the field was open. Like, the wheel routes out of the backfield, targeting tight ends right there in the seams. That's where they were hitting people, and not having Keenan Pili the last 2 years really hurt, because I think he was a difference maker for them in the middle of the field and was just kind of that leader on the defensive linebackers. But you have Aaron Carter in year 3. I think Edwin Spillman is going to be a really good player if he can stay healthy. But you're only being played blue chippers at linebacker now at this point. I think defense is going to be fine. I think there's a case to be made that the defense is better in 25 than it was in 24.
I don't know if the defense overall will be better. I mean, statistically, this was the best. Like, this is the best scoring defense they've had since the national title year.
Yeah.
That's all you can ask for. And I do get the frustrations by fans over the Georgia in Ohio State games. But like, think about what you're saying. They were great in like 11 games or 10
Mm-hmm.
games, whatever, and they were not great in 2. Like, you can live with that. Like, get to the tournament, get to the playoff, and then try to figure those things out. There are tweaks that Tim Banks needs to make. I think particularly how much he blitzes, when he blitzes. They've got to find an answer at linebacker of guys that can drop into coverage more, like you mentioned. There's fixes to that. What I like on defense is it seems to be more of a sense that they will try different guys out to find a
Mm-hmm.
solution. Rodney Garner has always done that. I mean, he plays a lot of guys, but William Inge at linebackers, like he's fine plugging in a freshman and like, let's see if this guy can do it in this
Mm-hmm.
situation. And you saw a little more of that in the secondary this year too. So defense will be solid to good. The difference in Tennessee being an elite team or not, I think, has got to come in the tweaks in offense. I do think they have the quarterback. I understand, some disappointment over parts of Nico's game, but I think they have the quarterback. They've just got to figure out how to make that offense go. And losing Dylan Sampson is obviously a big part of that. But, I mean, they've had different running backs, and they all sort of produce.
They're averaging 5 yards a carry all 4 years. Like I went back through and actually, they're going to average 5 yards a carry again next year. That's just what they do.
I mean, and it may not be a 1,500-yard rusher. It may be Peyton Lewis for 800 and Star Thomas for 400 and Deshaun Bishop for 400. Like, that's fine. That's, I mean, Jabari Small was starting 2 years ago, and he was probably the third best back on the team. Like, it's running back is going to be fine. They've got to figure out how to get the ball down the field and have some explosion. And that's got to be Josh Heupel's and Joey Halsley's fix. I don't know if that's as much personnel. They've had to have growth in that area. But, something you mentioned that I hadn't even thought about a second ago, so you mentioned was Boo Carter at Star. Like, I think they've got a tough decision to make in spring practice of like, because, you can sort of read the tea leaves. And I mean, there's even been some reporting of that. Like, Boo wants to play some offense, right? That's been out there for a while. How much offense does he play where he's helping the offense, but he's hindering other parts of his game? Like, this was a question Colorado asked with Travis Hunter, and they ended up getting their answer. But, if Boo Carter is one of the best defensive backs in the country, but doesn't play offense, like, isn't that better than if he's pretty good on defense, but also gives you a little something on offense? I mean, it's a tough balancing act. If he can be a dynamic player in the secondary and also give you 3 catches for 60 yards a game, because he can just, that thing that I said a minute ago where you got to throw it to a guy over the middle for a short route and him do something with it. That's probably Boo Carter. That can be. But I just don't know how much you pull away from him on defense to do some things like that on offense.
Well, that's why it's also maybe sneaky important that Jordan Thomas is back. I mean, Jordan Thomas was penciled in to be the starter at Star last year and suffered an injury before the year, and we didn't see him. But he's a good player, and if he's like, that's kind of that depth spot where you're like, okay, yeah, you lose Christian Harrison to the portal, but I think Jordan Thomas is right there. So if you do have to play Boo Carter a little bit more on offense to kind of appease everything, then you have somebody that you can trust who can get some more snaps and kind of relieve him and that kind of thing, that you feel comfortable in that spot. Because I think Jordan Thomas is a pretty good player, and like we said, he was scheduled to start there before the injury last year. So I don't know. I think Boo. I mean, what drove me nuts more about the Boo stuff last year, and I'm not really as worried about offense, but like him not starting on punt returns was ridiculous. Like that was just a ridiculous, just a what is it, musical chairs where they had Jermod McCoy back there, Squirrel back, and then you put Boo, and he almost breaks one against Georgia. That could have been a huge one. He gets stopped by the punter at the end there. I mean, Boo was electric with the ball in his hands, and we saw at Bradley Central and everything else. Like Boo should have been the day one starter. Like you saw what D. Williams did for them. And Boo, like, just let him make mistakes, even if he drops some, whatever. Like he's a difference maker. Let's not overthink Boo Carter a little bit, especially on special.
Well, let me make a subtle counterpoint. I think at the start of the year, especially with the bad teams they're playing early in the year, I think at the start of the year they thought this is going to be an offense that's going to put up 50 points. So hey, just put an experienced guy back there who will fair catch it or get 5 yards like Squirrel and won't turn it over or do anything dumb.
Mhm.
Just get the ball, and then Nico will come out and throw for 400 yards, and there'll be 50 points. It doesn't matter where the ball is spotted. And I think they didn't know the offense was going to be so stagnant.
Mm.
Where when we said, "Hey, Boo Carter should be returning punts," we were saying that because there were not big plays on offense. Had they had big plays on offense, I think it wouldn't have been as much of a need. The 22 team did not need a dynamic punt returner to put up points.
Yeah.
They just took away from the passing yards that Hendon Hooker had, if you got any. So I do think they made the right decision ultimately, and they should have had Boo Carter there to begin with. But I think they just thought the offense is going to be great, so let's just retain the ball. You don't need a big play. They needed big plays from Boo Carter, and I think they will next year too. They'll need them as much as they did this year.
It's kind of terrifying. I'll also say, Adam, like when you look at it's kind of funny that all of our questions about Tennessee is offense, and you have an offensive-minded coach. Like defense, I'm not like we're all like defense can be fine. Like I wouldn't panic about the defense. Defense can be fine. Defense is good enough to win a national championship. Like it's somewhere. It's going to keep you in that conversation. The offense isn't anywhere close. Like they were 94th in passing in conference play this year. The games where Dante Thornton did not get open were games that Tennessee lost. Like whenever Tennessee averaged less than 10 yards per reception, they lost every year, every game. So Miles Kitselman, if you see that he is leading Tennessee in yards this year, Tennessee probably lost that game. That was the case at Georgia. Like we like Miles Kitselman, but the tight end position is not a big part of the passing game of this offense. It never will be. But I look at this and I'm like, part of the issue last year was the Oklahoma game kind of set the stage for where Tennessee was going to be offensively. Because when they had to go to multiple backup tackles and they had to go to 12 personnel to survive on the road, they realized, oh, we're cooked because Nico, a young quarterback, getting blasted. He's taking big shots. We can't like sit back in the pocket and let something develop down the field. Like we're going to have to protect our young quarterback. And we're also just going to have to live with the fact that our defense is really good. We have this Heisman-esque running back. We're going to be able to run the football. We're just going to have to live in 12 personnel with Holden Stays and Miles Kitselman for the year. And you can't do that again. Like this offense can't function with two tight end sets and be this electric fun offense. You don't have the guys out wide who are going to get open one-on-one like that. Like it's just that that can't happen again in 2025. Like if they are living in a situation where Lance Hurd does not get a whole lot better than what we saw this past year, and David Sanders is not ready to go as a plug and play right tackle like you brought him in to be, nothing changes, I don't think, next year because you're going to have to be in 12 personnel all over again, and you're going to have to run the football down teams' throats. And like you said, like the floor is high there. Like it's still an 8-4, 9-3 type year, but the offense isn't better. Like if the tackles are not better, and Lance Hurd's got to get a whole lot better, and David Sanders has a lot of pressure to be a Darnell Wright, Wanya Morris right out of the gate, or nothing else works because Nico's getting crashed and you don't have time for anything to develop down the field. The tempo won't be there because the offensive line's not on the same mindset. Like I think that's an overlooked part. We're looking so much at receiver. I'm like, if the tackles aren't great, none of this matters. Like, cause you're going 12 personnel and we're going slow and we're driving it the same way Tennessee did last year.
Yeah, it was interesting to see Josh Heupel, how he digested their issues on offense throughout the year. And I never was sure like how much of this was actually on camera. Because we would see it sometimes him say things during a presser, but also like right before the presser, right after. He was so frustrated. And I think there was some helplessness that he was having to deal with because you're right. In the Oklahoma game, I remember in that post game, it was like, hey, we had this, we had this ace in the hole of 12 personnel, and we brought it out for this game. But obviously, moving forward, we'll go back to what we do. This was just a one-game thing, or just as needed. And then it became more and more evident that this is what they were going to have to be. And Josh Heupel increasingly, I think, got frustrated by that. Not that they used extra tight ends, but that they had to. They had no choice. And so that limited them so much. And I got the sense from Josh Heupel, like late in the season, certainly from the Georgia game on, there was this sense of, hey, gonna get to the playoff, I think, if you can get there. But like, I think he really looked forward to the off season because he saw problems during the season that were never going to get fixed. And so he was going to have to grind through something he was not enjoying. But you don't know, he's got an off season. Now he's got to fix it. I think so. I think Lance Hurd showed subtle improvements in the last quarter of the season. I mean, there were reasons that he was not good early on. His new system, you have to be in phenomenal shape to run in this offense because the tempo, when the tempo's going, he was a little out of shape when he got in. He was injured in fall camp, and then he got out and played some, and then he got injured again. There just wasn't time to work on what he needed to work on. So let's say from a 0 to 10, he was a 5 last year. I think he'll be a 7 this year. And you need him to be a 9.
Yeah.
But I think he'll be solid this year. David Sanders, I mean, you mentioned Wanye. I mean, they've had 3 or 4 guys over the years, 5 stars that play immediately, and they start immediately. And if he's not starting game 1, I think he'll be in the rotation, and I think he'll start not long after that. I think tackles will be better this year because your left tackle is going to be improved off of last year, and your right tackle will be better and get significantly better throughout the season. So I think tackle is going to be better. The interior line, I mean, that's tough. I will say Spraggins, even though he was all SEC, I thought he was solid, not great this year. Cooper Mays was really good. Carrick was serviceable, was his best, I think, since he's been at UT. I can see reasons for optimism on the offensive line. They do have some portal options. It's going to be hard to sort of get that offensive line all on the same page because they're replacing so many guys. But yeah, you are right. They can't be relying on tight ends to be in max protect because that just limits everything that Josh Heupel wants to do. And I think he was already behind the 8 ball based on some of the counters that he saw on the defensive side, on opponent's defensive side. So, but you cannot corner him in that way. That offensive line's got to certainly be better. And Nico, I mean, we're going into the second year with Nico as a starter. And I mean, he didn't play like an NFL high draft pick this past year. A lot of it wasn't his fault, but like he's here, you got to maximize what he's got.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing max protect and sending 2, maybe 3 receivers out in a route at the most, you're not maximizing what he has. And Nico needs to run.
Yes.
I know this has been a debate throughout, and I've been on both sides of it. He's. I mean, we saw it in the Citrus Bowl. He ran; it was very effective. We saw it in the playoff game, Ohio State. He ran
Georgia
it well.
too.
Yeah, so maybe it's got to be communicated more. In certain situations, in certain games, you need to set your brain to run when needed.
You saw Milton at Tuscaloosa, right? Like when he started doing option stuff, like that's the reason Tennessee was like, Alabama was like, I don't want to tackle Joe Milton. Like Joe Milton's built like Cam Newton. I don't want to tackle him. And he was just like, why aren't you running more? Like it was just one of those things. Yeah.
You can understand the calculus of it, especially early on. Like you want to see what Nico has and you don't want him to get hurt. You don't want him to blow out his knee or something against UTEP or whatever.
But you have 3 scholarship quarterbacks now. Like you only had 1 last year. This year you have 3.
And here's the thing, and so you can make a case where you say, well, you got to the playoff. If Nico wasn't healthy, you wouldn't have gotten to the playoff this year.
Mm-hmm.
But like you have him, use him. So I think we've crossed time now. He's started for a full season. You're going to the next season. Like utilize what you have. And really, I'll say this kind of from a fan perspective, and maybe this from a coach's perspective too. The guy's making like $2 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't mean to be, harsh or whatever, but you're paying $2 million a year. Like, use everything that he has.
I mean, this is it. Like, he's either going to the NFL draft or it's like portal because it's 2 years of just not great play, right? Like, this is the year. This is the make or break year. There's no point in holding anything back with Nico Iamaleava.
And I think he's better when he runs. Yes, he could get hurt, but anybody can get hurt. He's better when he runs and takes some contact. And he's just harder to defend if he's doing that.
I mean, it's just he's a better player. Like in this offense, I think you just need a mobile guy. Like I think you saw like Hendon Hooker the best year. Like when you're number 1 on offense, like Hendon Hooker took off all the time in the big games. Like at the Florida game, the Alabama game, like he was. It just I don't think it works without his legs. If you are not making defenses respect him running and just taking off and things aren't there quickly, I don't think this offense can be what it needs to be. Like, he has to run.
Hendon
There's just no way around it.
Hendon Hooker, we come to find out now, was the best suited quarterback for this offense that you could have.
Yeah.
Joe Milton, I would argue, is a better pro style quarterback. He did not fit this offense. I think you can see with the Patriots now, like, that looks pretty good. Nico, at times this last year, I thought he fits a different style offense. I'm not sure about that now, though, because when he would run, you could see him fitting in this offense. When he didn't, you kind of thought the opposite. So, we'll see. But they've got to use him for what he has.
100%. It's a gigantic year. There's no point in holding anything back with Nico this year. Like, I just think that you might as well, see what, like, you just can't play scared. And I think they were playing scared with Nico a lot last year, which I understood. Like, you were still with a walk-on backup and you're trying to get to the playoff, this, that, and the other. I just don't think, and next year, to put a bow on it here, Adam, like, Heupel, to get to the playoff in 2025, Heupel will have to win a game he has not won yet at Tennessee. He's raised the floor in a lot of ways, but he hasn't beaten Georgia. You get Georgia at home early. You're 0-4 at this point. Haven't scored in the second half the last 2 years. You got to win at Gainesville. It's been a house of horrors continued on with Heupel in Gainesville. Haven't won there. And then at Tuscaloosa, where you actually have played well both times in Tuscaloosa, you should have won in 23. If you just convert one of those red zone trips from a field goal to a touchdown, I think you're up 3 scores. Alabama doesn't come out with that kind of just fight and ready to go, like the ball back. Like, it's a little bit different to go into the locker room down 10 points versus 21. And Tennessee was right there to put them in a big hole early on. And I think you can win at Tuscaloosa, but you have to win one of the 3. There's no way around it. And to win one of those 3 games that you haven't won yet, it's just Nico's got to be a Heisman type guy. Like, it's just he has to be the 2 million guy that you brought in 2 years ago. There was a lot of training wheel stuff this past year, which I understand. But, like, you've got George McIntyre, you got a true freshman 4-star coming in here. You've got Jake Merklinger, who's now been in the system for 2 years. He's a 4-star. Like, you can't play like, I can't get Nico hurt. Like, this has to be all gas, no brakes. Like, shout out to Gas Pipe, Gas and More. But, like, that's how it has to be. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, and there are so many unknowns in the schedule. You mentioned 3 knowns there, but wait, Florida, I think, is at the end of the year. So
end of November, yeah.
Is that going to be a top 25 Florida team? Because it could be, or is that going to be, hey, we're firing Billy Napier in a week?
Yeah,
type of Florida team.
That's what you
don't
hope.
know. Georgia's early. It's at home, which is good, which makes that thing, I think, at least seem winnable. But it hasn't been so far. You're right. Winning at Tuscaloosa, I think, is doable because it's Kalen DeBoer. That's why. And right now, Alabama's got bigger questions than Tennessee. They some people think they're a top 5 team. Some people think they're barely a top 25 team. I think they're probably somewhere in between the two. But you don't know about the schedule because they have the same schedule as last year, but like Oklahoma ended up being a mediocre team. Well, now they have a quarterback, John Mateer. So is that, and they were good on defense. So is that going to be a top 25 team, like a legit top 25 team coming to Knoxville? Like we don't know. There's, is Vanderbilt going to be competitive? Like they were this past season, or are they going to be like a 3-9 type Vanderbilt? Like, I just use those as a couple of examples that you can't necessarily say, well, all the wins that were last year are going to be wins again, and then you've just got to win these big games. I think there's going to be some unknowns in there because people are reloading through the transfer portal, and that's why Tennessee has to reload through the transfer portal because nothing is guaranteed now, and you can go from playoff team to 8-4 in a snap of the finger, or you can go 8-4 to a playoff team the opposite way, which a team like an LSU, I'm sure, feels like they can do. And so for all the teams that have made portal moves and have probably upped their stock in this portal window, that could push a team like Tennessee out of it. Because let's say 3 or 4 teams make the playoff out of the SEC. Well, for a new team to get in, another team's got to be put out. And I think a lot of people see Tennessee stock as not dropping, but just slipping a little bit based on all the experience they lost. They can counter that with some portal additions and development, but those are two big questions that probably aren't going to be answered until we get closer to the fall.
Adam Sparks, what can the good folks check out from you and the team over at Knoxville News Sentinel this week?
Yeah, I'm doing some more updated depth chart roster stuff. Looking to see if there's a comp of Ohio State's roster building for Tennessee. Doing digging deep into that, and I was hoping to do some rev share stuff, but that's now up in the air because of all the Title IX stuff that's come out. So we'll see. The new presidential administration is in. We'll see if that affects rev share, but because that's coming this year, and then we'll alter NIL or could. So. But immediately this next week, probably some stuff on the roster depth chart, and certainly some neat reporting on guys that Tennessee's trying to pull in late from the portal.
I love it. Go subscribe, Knoxville News Sentinel today if you are not already, and keep up with Adam and everybody over there's great work each and every day at the Sentinel. Adam, we'll have to do this again soon.
Yep, good to be on.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.